It's nice to see those of you who work in the energy industry, those of you who build for the energy industry, those of you that consume energy, and those of you that are concerned about that impact on our environment. And that's really the genesis for our conversation today. So I'm going to do a couple introductions, and as I do this, I'm going to explain. You'll see behind me Dr. Joan Fitzgerald, who is our interim dean of the Dukakis Center for Policy and Urban Studies at the university, located in Boston. Joan had planned to be here with us today, and due to circumstances beyond her control, had to stay in Boston. And so this gave us a great opportunity for us to showcase one of the things we do best at the university, and that is to leverage technology. And so you'll see Joan here on the screen behind us. She's going to look off to her right because her camera is located back here where our camera is, so she's not ignoring us. She promises, but she's trying to engage with each of you, and she can see by virtue of the cameras that we have as well. So she'll look off to the right to engage you in conversation, and then when she addresses us, you'll see her look straight on. I will not do bios. You've seen the bios on the back of here, but I do want to give Joan a big plug for her latest book that I think many of you have read or at least seen and heard of, Emerald Cities, Urban Sustainability and Economic Development. If you have not picked this up and read it, you really should. It's a great and Joan, we are thrilled to have you with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad I could be here, at least on camera.
This is great. We're showing your technology. Michael Youth is the Council and Policy Director for the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association, a great partner of ours in this program, and thanks to Mike Davis for your partnership in this as well. Providing the perspective not only from North Carolina, but how broad federal policy impacts this conversation as well. So, Michael, thank you for being here with us. And then you all know this gentleman over here, if not in person, but because his picture's in the Business Journal every week, and that's Eric Spanberg, who has served as our moderator for these programs. This is now our fifth in this series. And Eric, we thank you for your moderating, and I'll turn it over to you to take the conversation.
Great, thanks. Well, welcome back to those who have been here. I have good news and bad news. So anyone who's sort of a generalist on this topic, just sort of learning about it, we share something in common. But if you're looking for the expert, my partner John Downey is over there, who covers energy and utilities for our paper. So he is the true expert and will correct me as I go wrong, which won't take long. So last month we were here talking about education, and this month we come back to talk about sustainable energy. And much like education, I think it's one that's not only a topic of a lot of debate, but also controversy, and it affects everyone, obviously, consumers, businesses, lawmakers. And so, you know, the idea here is today, whether you drive a Prius or an SUV, this is an issue that impacts all of us, and so we're going to try and discuss the truth, whether it's inconvenient or not. So, on that note, Michael, we're going to start with you. You know, there are a lot of changes underway here and across the state that will have a lot of influence on sustainable energy and related issues in the years ahead. And we'll start with, of course, the big merger with Duke and Progress, $30 billion merger. Can you just talk a little bit about what you see happening now that that is going through?
Yes, first, thank you for having me. It's good to see all of you here. The merger was a big change. I think what I will do is talk about the merger in terms of practices, and then I want to make sure we highlight the fact that there's also bigger policy out there than the merger that will impact sustainable energy in North Carolina. So let me talk about the practices first. The merger, we had Progress and Duke, separate companies prior to the merger. Each of them had certain practices. Cities might be interested, for example, in how the two companies treated LED lighting. They might have liked Progress's treatment of LED lighting more than Duke's. The cities want to see the best practice emerge in the new merged entity. The reverse might have been true also. Sometimes Duke might have had a better practice in terms of interconnection review than Progress. Again, the cities and others want to see the best practices emerge. Those practices are really important and key. They will impact sustainable energy, but I want to make sure we all understand that there are state underpinnings, policy underpinnings, that are probably more important right now than the merger. What I mean by that is we've got a legislature in session now that may be looking at our renewable energy portfolio standard. That is the law in North Carolina that requires our utilities to procure a certain percentage of their electricity from clean energy sources or energy efficiency. We've got our renewable energy tax credits that may come under scrutiny. And then we've got something called an avoided cost proceeding. And avoided costs are what utilities pay clean energy, we call them qualified facilities, clean energy generators, for the electricity they produce. So the utilities right now have proposed dramatically lower prices for that electricity. So those three things, REPs, tax credit, and avoided cost rates, are really key right now for keeping sustainable energy in North Carolina strong.
Before I go to the first question for Joan, let me follow up, Michael, on the idea of you're talking about the state, and obviously we have not only the Republican-controlled General Assembly, which had occurred during the Perdue administration, but now we have a Republican governor, so you have the party controlling all three corridors of power, and Pat McCrory obviously is a former Duke Energy employee, so just could you give us a thought on where you think they might lean policy-wise?
Yes, I want to make sure I give Joan a chance to talk.
Don't worry, Joan's the next question. I just wanted to...
So
it's out there. Let's get it on the table.
You all, being from Charlotte, are much more familiar with your former Mayor McCrory than I am with Governor McCrory. But I will say that I think what's driving the legislature and the Republican governors' policies are going to be economic development and jobs. So if clean energy aligns on those topics, those ideas, it is going to be incorporated into their policy. And so I think Governor McCrory has said he's for all of the above in terms of energy policy. That means I am going to take him at his word, and I expect, in addition to some things that folks may not like, that our energy policy is going to integrate clean energy and energy efficiency.
Joan, finally, you get to speak to us.
Okay.
And so I want to start with a very broad question, which is James Hansen, who I think probably most people in here know is the climate change expert, NASA scientist. He has said there's a sizable gap between what scientists know about environmental change caused by humans and the public perception of that. How much of an issue is that for both of you and what you were trying to do?
I think it's a big issue, and I think there's three elements to it. The first one is most people just like to deny bad news. And so when we look at some of the, how climate is depicted, and particularly if effects are off in the future, the general belief is, well, we'll deal with it when we have to. And so there's an unwillingness to support policies, particularly if those policies require a little bit of sacrifice. So for example, a higher gas tax. We know that that would make a big difference in terms of being able to invest in transit. But any politician knows supporting that is the kiss of death. But even things that are not sacrifices, look at all of the energy efficiency programs that have been developed around the country that subsidize energy efficiency efforts in people's homes. And in many cities, they're having trouble getting takers on that. So I think just kind of awareness of the problem and wanting to avoid the problem, not wanting to spend any money now is one aspect of the problem. I think another thing that's really problematic here is the low level of science literacy in the United States. And so it's easy for climate doubters or oil companies to insert just the least little bit of evidence to say, oh, climate change is not man-made, or the evidence really doesn't show it's happening. And there's not enough knowledge of science on the part of the public to evaluate those claims. And then when you have a media that feels that you have to give equal weight to two different views, even though one has 98% of the scientists supporting it and the other one doesn't, feeds into that problem. And then finally, I think one of the things, if we look at even the IPCC report, all of the reporting on climate change treats it pretty much as a cost. This is something that's going to really cost us. And rather than pointing out the opportunities, rather than presenting it in a more Keynesian view, that there's a lot of opportunities for economic development on that. So I think the only hope, I think as a result of Sandy, I think the drought that we're seeing, in the Mississippi River is, the evidence is pretty much in front of us now. People, are more open to accepting the fact that something weird is going on in climate.
I can't believe the media would make mistakes, by the way.
Eric, may I jump in and say
Yes.
something? So what we've found locally is climate change is a very divisive issue, particularly with the Republican-controlled legislature. We've been focusing on jobs and economic development. Clean energy is bringing jobs to North Carolina. We worked with RTI and La Capra, two consultants. They did research, and over the period 2007 to 2012, our REPS law and our other suite of clean energy and energy efficiency supportive policies brought 21,000 job years to North Carolina. So basically that's 20,000 jobs, and $173 million in savings is expected because of these policies for North Carolina over a 20-year period. So by 2026, ratepayers will have saved $173 million because we've got clean energy integrated into our utilities portfolios. That's what I think is going to garner support for clean energy more than talking about the climate change benefits. I'm not denying that there might be climate change benefits, and that's certainly an ancillary benefit we love. But what's going to resonate most with decision makers right now, I think, is the jobs and economic development.
May I just add just a little something there? I totally agree that we need to focus on the economic development side of it. That's what Emerald Cities was all about. But I think kind of whistling in the wind and, it's all economic development and ignoring the climate question is not the way to go. I think it's both and. And was it South Carolina or North Carolina that didn't allow climate change to be used in legislature? And I'm teaching a course right now where we're bringing in a lot of guest speakers. And we recently had retired Rear Admiral David Titley from the Navy, who's a PhD meteorologist and didn't really subscribe or, was not a strong believer in climate change until he was put in charge of the Navy of investigating this. And of course, the reason is all of their bases just happened to be at sea level. And they figured out that this was going to be a real problem. And he became quite a zealot and is one of the leading people from the military throughout the country going around talking about climate as a national security issue. And so it's just kind of shocking to me that the military is kind of the part of government or the part of our society in general that really gets it and is responding. And so my only point is totally agree on the economic development, but we can't do it in a context of just, climate may or may not be changing, but look at all these great economic development opportunities.
In fact, the Naval Academy is relocating to Berkeley, so that's what's. But along those lines, the president made climate change a central issue in the State of the Union recently, and one of the things he talked about was because of the recalcitrance of Congress that there were executive orders that he would carry out to make progress on climate change. However you feel about that, can both of you talk about what possibilities there are out there in terms of law and policy that could make some improvement in this area? Whoever wants to start.
I can feel that. Contrary to how I was introduced, I am not an expert on federal law, but I will say, just like we've got a state tax credit that is really helping clean energy grow in North Carolina, we've got federal tax credits, and those are also key to the growth of clean energy in the United States. We saw how debate at the federal level on the wind tax credit basically shut down that industry for a while, and now we've got an extended tax credit for a year, but it's difficult for businesses to ramp up and ramp down. Businesses want certainty. So if we can keep those tax credits in place, at least for the near term, I think that will really help clean energy. And then in the electricity arena, we've got a very supportive Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which is really pushing for the integration of clean energy across the country. So that's helpful. If we see changes in North Carolina that are not as supportive for clean energy, it's nice to have that federal backdrop for the next few years at least that is going to be very supportive.
Joan, what do you think about that issue?
I agree in terms of the production tax credits and the need to have those like they are throughout European countries and many others ongoing, instead of the industry not knowing whether they're going to be renewed. I think several other things would be best done at the federal level. Investment in infrastructure, huge smart grid investment. Part of the stimulus had that. Not enough. I think smart grid is going to be essential to what we want to do, whether it's renewable energy or energy efficiency, and we need to look at that. Also need investment in research on storage. Obviously, that is the problem with both solar and wind. But I think above and beyond, you mentioned regional or the state portfolio standards. Should we have a federal one? That was considered. I don't know politically whether that would happen. I think it's important. But I think the policy that goes above all of this is a carbon tax. I think the cap and trade system is too complicated, does not move to where we want to go. The idea of a carbon tax is it's very direct. You're taxing the thing that you want to reduce. How would we do it? I think it has to be a tax on consumption. And the reason is, if you look at Great Britain, pretty much all of their reduction in CO2 emissions is related to the fact that their manufacturing is gone. And so in many ways, the loss of manufacturing in the US and in many European countries, moving that to China and Asia is just shifting where carbon is produced. And so it really needs to be a tax on consumption, and then those funds can be redistributed to invest in the sustainable energies of the future. So I would say a carbon tax above all, and then investment in infrastructure and research and development in smart grid and renewable energy.
We've already talked a little bit about the intersection of business and sustainable energy, both good and bad. In North Carolina and across the country, the obvious debate that's going on that has to be mentioned is this issue of fracking the natural gas. And so, when you talk about 20,000 jobs, when you look at some of the states that produce a lot of natural gas, the impact is much, much greater. And so we're going to get into a debate. We're already in a debate about, what are the costs? Is it worth it? So I'd like to hear both of you from your respective vantage points talk about this idea of increased offshore drilling in states where it could happen, such as North Carolina, and also the idea of natural gas and fracking as a savior, but also a potential environmental problem.
Well, I think we've got some real choices ahead of us. So given that about 48% of our electricity is produced by coal, Our question is, and that nuclear, well, you've got some developments, but that there doesn't seem to be a lot in the pipeline. Our choice really is toward is coal or natural gas in transition to renewables. So it's looking at which is the worst one, and fracking is not good, but I think the pathway is more natural gas on a pathway to renewables. But we have to do it better than we have now. I think there needs to be probably at the regional or state level very strong regulation, certainly much stronger than it has been with water and all the problems associated with it. But if you have to choose between coal and natural gas, I would choose natural gas.
Well, I'll let you know, I was informed this morning there's a bill in the North Carolina legislature, Senate Bill 76, the Energy Jobs Act. Where's Pasquale? There he is. Told me this morning that that has passed the legislature through the Senate. Okay. So North Carolina is moving toward wanting to bring jobs to the state. Again, I think what's underpinning the idea of offshore drilling and fracking in North Carolina is we want the jobs, we want the economic development. At this point, I think passing laws like that, what's being proposed now, are aimed at that. By virtue of the name, you can see that, Energy Jobs Act. At NCSEA, we've remained agnostic on fracking because it is a very complicated issue. I don't think we have the expertise. There's a debate raging across the country about it. And as you've heard Joan say, there are a lot of folks who believe natural gas is better than coal. It can serve as a bridge fuel. And our opinion, our position is that right now we are not ready as a country to run solely on wind and solar. Maybe someday with battery storage we might be better able to do that. But in the short term, we need some kind of baseload fuel. That's going to be nuclear, coal, or natural gas right now. Natural gas seems to be the least evil of the three. Some folks are now questioning that even because of fugitive emissions from birth to grave. But will this act actually bring jobs to North Carolina in the short term? That's what I think we should be asking, and I think everything I've heard is that it will not, because we don't have the types of plays, they call these things, that investors are really going to want to get involved with in the near term, nor do we have the infrastructure to get the gas from the plays into the pipeline system. So I don't know that we're really worried about folks coming and drilling in the next year or two for that reason. The law will certainly send a signal, but I think the signal is more directed at we want jobs than we are willing to harm the environment. I don't think that's the legislature's intent.